Okay, I think we're about ready to get started. My name is Johanna Rupp, and I'd like to warmly welcome you to Book Passage on this very warm day. Thank you so much for coming out and joining us and supporting your local independent bookstore. Isabel Allende is called Book Passage the cultural soul of our community, and it's really the truth. It's a great place to come together and learn new things and support one another. So thank you so much. Tonight, Book Passage is proud to welcome Janis Heaphy Durham, the first publisher of the Sacramento Bee, which earned 2 Pulitzer Prizes under her incredible leadership. Janis is also an amazing writer, and she is with us to share her book, The Hand on the Mirror, a true story of life beyond death. This book is an intimate and powerful chronicle of Janis's personal experiences with life after death, as well as the thoughts of regarded scientists and spiritual leaders on this mysterious phenomenon. The result is a breathtaking book that is a testimony to the power of love to cross time and space and life and death. So please join me in warmly welcoming Janis Heaphy.
Good evening. Thank you, Johanna. That was very, very nice introduction. I just want to comment that I really appreciate this bookstore and Book Passage here in our community. We're very fortunate to have it. Many communities aren't this lucky. And also just to thank Elaine Petricelli for her leadership in that regard. She's done so very much to make this much more than a bookstore. It's a cultural institution. We're all very grateful. Well, thank you for showing up tonight. I have some comments to share with you, but before I do that, I thought I would actually read to you a little bit from my book. I think it'll help you think about whether or not you might be interested in reading it. So I'm going to start with the introduction because it's a very broad stroke that gives you a sense of the book, and then I'll read you just a portion of the first chapter. This is a story of an unusual personal journey. It's not what you would expect from someone with my traditional upbringing and experience in the hard-edged world of newspapers. It begins with the untimely death of my beloved husband, Max Bessler, in 2004, and follows with a series of extraordinary events that startled me at first and then intrigued me. Unfolding over 8 years, this is a story of my spiritual growth and how my mind gradually opened to realities that I previously would have considered unimaginable. It's a story about love and how love ties us all together in a far more fascinating universe than I ever imagined. In the end, I hope my story will be a source of strength to all who are touched by death, which of course is everyone. The question of what happens when we die has always challenged us. The topic makes us uneasy. Here we are, living active and full lives. Why do we even want to think about death? Then it strikes. We lose someone we love, and we're faced with contemplating death and the afterlife. Scientists, theologians, writers, musicians, poets, and artists have all addressed the question, either directly or indirectly. It's at the core of organized religion's belief system, one that I grew up with as a Presbyterian. We believe that when you die, you go to heaven. When you die, you go to heaven. But what exactly is heaven? If we knew, not just from the faith of our religions, but from modern science, that our consciousness survives after death, it would profoundly affect how we behave. I think it's arguable this question of whether or not there is an afterlife is the most important question in life. What could be more important? The Hand on the Mirror suggests that we continue on in another form after we die. Simply put, life does not end with our physical death. My hope is to open readers' thinking to this possibility. The most compelling motivation for writing The Hand on the Mirror was the potential to encourage people to talk openly about their experiences of communicating with a loved one after the loved one had passed. I also hope this book will provide readers with not only an emotional framework, but also an intellectual foundation of legitimacy for those conversations. These discussions should be out in the open, free of constraint. As a society, we could benefit from eliminating the stigma associated with sharing personal stories about the afterlife, including those that involve the supernatural, as mine do. This fear of embarrassment was a significant part of my reluctance over many years to write this book. I knew that what I revealed would be provocative, and I obsessed over what my family and my friends would think. Of course, I knew they loved me, but I was worried that wouldn't stop them from thinking that my personal and profound grief had affected my judgment. And I was also concerned about my wider circle of friends and associates, particularly those I work with in the newspaper industry. I was convinced that the bizarre nature of the events I experienced would be impossible for many of them to accept. Who could blame them? The story is incredible. It's out of bounds of the normal, and even though there are documenting photographs, people often believe only what they choose to believe. Not what may be unbelievable, but true. I know I'm not alone in this fear of being judged. As part of my research, I shared my story and the accompanying photographs with a number of people, and many related to me their experiences with otherworldly events. In fact, they were eager to tell me their stories, and sometimes they added that they had never shared them with anyone, in certain cases even their spouses, for fear of how they would be viewed. Learning about their reluctance fueled my courage to come forward. Most stories have characters. This one is no exception. You'll meet my family, my friends, professors, researchers, psychologists, physicists, spiritual practitioners, mediums, and a host of other individuals who are part of the journey and pivotal in my investigation. You'll be surprised at their similarities of thought, although they are not always expressed with the same language. You will meet a number of key scientific leaders in this field. You'll hear about their frustrations in trying to further their exploration. I hope you will come to know them, as I have, as fascinating people. Lasting change is not driven from the top down, but from the bottom up. People get behind an idea and unbelievable things can happen. Abraham Lincoln said it well. With public sentiment, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed. If readers can feel safe to share their stories about the survival of consciousness and an afterlife, momentum will build. That will drive the topic further into the mainstream, perhaps leading to more extensive, accurate, and serious media coverage. With momentum, scientists can explore this field in a properly funded, more open environment. Any contribution this book can make to that momentum will be immensely gratifying to me. An expanding acceptance of the survival of consciousness and therefore life after death has the potential to bring about change in all of us. We'll live our lives with more emphasis on love and less on fear of loss. And maybe, just maybe, we'll begin to understand our purpose. Chapter 1. The Hand on the Mirror. On Sunday, May 8th, 2005, my reality changed. That was the day I discovered a large handprint on the mirror of a bathroom in my home in Sacramento, California. It was not an ordinary handprint. Seemingly made of a soft, white, powdery substance, it showed all the facets of the bone structure, as if it were an X-ray. Looking closer, I could see it was the hand of a man because of the masculine shape of the fingers and the wide base of the palm. The handprint stood alone, the image affixed to the mirror, and perfectly formed. It had appeared out of nowhere, literally nowhere. Now, the day the hand appeared was the first anniversary of the death of my husband, Max Bessler. Max had died in the living room of our home, surrounded by family and friends. We had been married for 4 years when he was diagnosed at the age of 56 with esophageal cancer. 6 months later, he was gone, devastating my 14-year-old son Tanner and me. We both loved Max very much, and the three of us had blossomed as a family. On this Mother's Day Sunday, a year later, I was still working through my grief, and I was concerned about how Tanner was coping with his own sorrow. He was so young and impressionable, and like most young men at that age, he wasn't a big talker. I felt pensive and alert on this 1-year anniversary, vigilant in my role as mother and protector. Tanner and I were sitting together at a small table that was out in our backyard in the early afternoon sun. Tanner split his time between our home in Sacramento and his dad's home in El Dorado Hills, about 30 minutes away. Divorce is never easy, but his dad, Bob Heaphy, and I were committed to keeping Tanner's interests first and foremost in our lives. We'd worked hard to provide a steady, dependable schedule for him and assurance in deeds and words that even though he lived in 2 homes, he was loved and supported fully in both. Max had added to that love. On this significant day, I was comforted to have Tanner with his short cropped blonde hair and athletic physique next to me. I loved watching him concentrate on his homework, and I smiled a mother's smile as I noticed his habit of moving his lips while he silently read. I was catching up on my own self-imposed homework, the backlog of reading I faced each and every weekend in my job. After a while, we decided we were hungry, and I got up from the table to go inside and bring us a snack. Tanner was eating like any healthy teenage boy, meaning non-stop. Besides, the food offered a distraction from the sadness in our hearts on this anniversary. Our home was designed in a U shape, with the master bedroom suite, Tanner's bedroom, and a den on the left side of the U, and the living room, dining room, and library at the center. On the right side of the U were our kitchen, a guest bedroom suite, a laundry room, and an exit to the garage. Max had spent the last month of his life in the guest bedroom instead of our master bedroom because he was more comfortable in a bed by himself, and he was in grave pain. Plus, he insisted I get my sleep since I was working. Before entering the kitchen to make our snack, I stopped in the bathroom in the guest bedroom suite. That was when I saw the handprint. I knew it was fresh because it hadn't been there when I'd combed my hair in front of that mirror an hour earlier. Stunned by the sight, I stood frozen for at least a full minute. I could make no sense of what I saw. At 53 years old, I had never experienced anything so completely out of the human realm as this handprint. My eyes were fixed on something unexplainable. My brain was working to catch up with my eyes. Was I losing my mind? Maybe. Had someone snuck into the house to play a trick? Doubtful. Tanner and I would have seen or heard anyone through the open patio doors. How could a human hand show the transparency of an X-ray? Slowly, my voice started to function, and I managed to shout out the words. Tanner, come here quickly, hurry. Mom, what's wrong? Are you okay? He asked. Look, I cried out. You didn't do this, did you? I was sounding somewhat hysterical to myself at this point. I knew as soon as the words left my lips that he hadn't made the handprint because he'd been sitting next to me throughout the time during the hours since I'd visited the bathroom. Just to double check, I asked Tanner to hold his right hand up next to the powdery right hand print to see how it compared. I realized how ludicrous it was to think he had made the print. The image was much larger than his hand and shaped differently. So I'm going to stop there because I just don't want to keep reading and reading at you. You might get tired of it. But that's the beginning of the story. And I'd like to ask you now in my comments, I'd like you to just imagine for a moment that you were me. What would you have done when you saw that handprint? How would you have felt? Would you be frightened? Would you be mystified? Would you be curious? Most of us in our lives seek rational explanations. We want to feel safe. We want to feel normal. We want to feel ordinary. In fact, it's habitual to conform in most cultures over history. Institutions help us to function in rational ways. Think about it. We organize ourselves around the societal establishments of family, community, religion, education, business, and government. Why do we do this? We do it because it makes sense and it works. Initially, I just wanted to make sense of the print. I wanted to fit this powdery handprint and the many other occurrences into a sensible and rational explanation. But the handprint did not conform, and instead of ordinary, it was extraordinary. And I, as a traditionally fact-based and rational person, was very ill-equipped to address it. I was raised in the Midwest in Hamilton, Ohio, near Cincinnati. I went to public schools and graduated with a bachelor and master's degree in education from Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. After teaching for a few years in a small town called 7 Mile, outside Oxford, my longtime friend, 56 years now, and I traveled across country to California with our walkie-talkies in hand, and I wound up, no phones back then, and I wound up at the Los Angeles Times and later the Sacramento Bee. At the time I discovered the handprint, I'd spent some 25 years in the fact-based world of newspapers. Newspapers are about reporting the news with accuracy and balance. We investigate, we research, and then we publish with the goal of helping readers stay informed. And I was at the helm of the newspaper, so I represented for the paper the idea of that legitimate form of communication: intelligent, fact-based, quality journalism. With nothing in my background to prepare me for something as strange as the sighting of this powdery print, initially I chose to compartmentalize it. I just set it aside. Over several years, however, my curiosity took over, partly because there were way too many events accumulating to deny reality any longer. The powdery prints were only a portion of what occurred. One day, a friend said to me, "You know, you've spent your entire adult life in newspapers. Why don't you do what newspapers do? Investigate." Ah, a pivotal moment. She was so right. And so I began to move into investigative research mode. My goal was to explore the worlds of spirituality and science, looking for some sort of explanation for these phenomena. The basic question I asked myself was, does our consciousness survive death? Had Max figured out a way to reach over from the other side to our world? I wanted to know if he existed in another form, a non-physical form. I imagine that many of you in this room have had to cope with the death of a loved one. Maybe it was your mother or your father, perhaps a sibling. It may have been your husband, your wife, your best friend, or God forbid, your child. Facing death may have changed you too, in ways nothing else in your life has. Did you ask yourself that same question? What happens when we die? Is there more? My husband Max was a partner in a political consulting firm in Sacramento. He worked on local and state politicians' campaigns as well as voters' initiatives. He had a brilliant mathematical mind, and he was a voracious reader of nonfiction. He and I shared a passion for current events, politics, the arts, literature. There was nothing in our family or our social routines that pointed to a predisposition toward the ethereal, the magical, or the celestial. Basically, we were living a happy, unexamined life, the kind most of us live. Then, in May of 2004, Max died. Everything changed. Tanner and I witnessed the man we loved dwarf from a muscular 205 pounds to a shrunken and bony 138 pounds, all the while fighting a courageous battle he would never win. During this brutal time, I lost my bearings. I lost the roots of my previous 5 decades of regular life. My busy, ordinary daily life became unmoored. It was the beginning of the journey. Over time, I discovered much about the spirit world. I learned about spiritual healing, past life regression, reincarnation, mediums, time travel into the future, ancient Peruvian Indian practices, spirit guides, ghosts, auras, and the power of meditation and prayer in life. I also learned about near death, and out-of-body experiences. Throughout this time of investigating and learning, I never lost my own faith. In fact, in some ways, it was my faith that allowed me to be secure versus defensive as I sought new understanding. Why can't we incorporate more than one belief system anyway? I see it as the power of and. I believe in God and I believe in the spiritual realm. I also gained knowledge about the science surrounding the study of consciousness. Scientists, engineers, doctors, professors all help me understand consciousness as separate from the brain. Not only do I believe consciousness exists beyond the brain, I believe it extends beyond individuals, and it has quantum properties that affect the likelihood of events occurring, that it can even inject order into systems in proportion to its strength and focus. In fact, there is credible research substantiating the concept that groups can have a kind of shared consciousness when all the members are focused on an event or an object. Simply put, there is evidence of a collective consciousness. I became educated about something I'd previously never even heard of, Bell's theorem. The quantum concept that our world is non-local, meaning things can be connected across time and space in seeming contradiction to the physical laws governing time and space. Along the path, I found new inspiration from a physicist who reminded me of something I'd taken for granted my entire life, that we as humans possess free will, a quality that makes us unique among all species. And this free will has enormous power if we choose to recognize and make use of it. I learned about telepathy, mind-to-mind connections, clairvoyance, perceiving distant objects, and precognition, perceiving future events, from a PhD in educational psychology with an electrical engineering background. He taught me about the meta-analysis and research being conducted to substantiate the idea that humans, concentrating on a preferred outcome, can actually affect what would ordinarily be a random outcome. In fact, due to results of more than 800 experiments, the odds that the human mind affects outcome is better than 1,000,000,000,000 to 1. By the way, this scientist is right here in Petaluma, Dr. Dean Radin, who runs the Noetic Institute. I've often asked if any of my findings provided me with the proof that consciousness survives death, that there is more than the physical reality. The answer is no. In my experience, there is no proof per se, but that doesn't mean there isn't evidence that the afterlife exists and our consciousness continues in a new form. I don't for one moment profess to have the answers or to be any kind of authority on the topic of what happens when we die. I'm not qualified. Who is? Throughout my journey, I only had one goal: to learn what I could to help make sense out of what was happening. And as important, I felt an obligation to pursue this study because of Max. If he had figured out a way to cross over across time and space, the least I could do was hold my end up and meet him halfway. Once I began to share my story with others, I realized that they often had their own stories to tell, but like me, they were afraid to come forward. And again, that's why I wrote the book, to help open the dialogue, allow others to feel less intimidated or embarrassed to speak up about their own experiences. The fact that there will be skeptics who will question my story is healthy, necessary, and valuable. I have lived my entire life as a professional skeptic. I get it. My goal is not to convince anyone, just to open up the dialogue. I'd like to close by sharing what I believe are the 7 principal lessons I've learned from this multi-year journey. Number 1, to pay attention. So much happens that we miss because we're not paying attention. If we choose to be in the present and pay attention to the coincidences and the synchronicities in our lives instead of being distracted, I believe we will begin to see the spirit realm interacting with us. Number 2, to be open. If we close off to that which we can't explain or we haven't experienced, we will lose our imaginations and curiosities, key components of learning. Think about it. Any new concept, invention, piece of art, literature, technology, any progress made in society requires an open mind. Number 3, to exercise free will. We all choose our own thinking, our own behavior. As Dr. Paul Wendland, the quantum physicist, reminded me, it's free will that makes us different. And in my experience, it's a direct path to learning. By exercising our free will, we define ourselves with our personal choices and our pursuits. In other words, we choose to grow, to learn, to expand our thinking, to be curious, or not. Number 4, to explore life. Exploration is the root of discovery. Without exploration, life is predictable, it's confining, and it's stagnated, void of progress. We develop our passions and capacities by exploring, even when it's intimidating and even when it runs against our own common beliefs. Number 5, to read and research. There is such great power in reading and challenging ourselves with credible research. Books, look where we're sitting, whether fiction or nonfiction, periodicals, newspapers, other online information, can lead to new thinking and to experiencing worlds we'd never otherwise know. The written word is one of life's great teachers. Number 6, to let go of the judge. Before judging like a skeptic that which we may not believe is possible, try understanding it just to see what we can learn that might be different from what we think we know or believe. Number 7, to choose to love. The greatest lesson of all. I believe love is the most powerful emotion in life and is the bridge between this world and the next. Losing someone we love is life's most challenging circumstance. We seek and receive comfort in believing that the love and essence of that person lives on in our hearts and minds each and every day. But what if we could also believe that maybe, just maybe, they continue to exist in another realm and in another form? And that's really what The Hand on the Mirror is about. It's a story about the power of love in life. As Celine Dion says, I was blessed because I was loved by you. My world is a better place because of you. So that's it for my comments. Thank you for being patient and listening. It's kind of hot out there tonight, and people get tired about this time, start thinking about going to sleep. So, well, I'd like to open it up for any questions that you might have. I know it's a little hard to kick off. Go ahead.
I'm going to believe everything you said and that occurred to you. The question I have is, what happened to you immediately or the year after your husband passed? There must have been some transformative processes going on within you that led to what happened afterwards. I'm very interested in what occurred in your life the year after the passage of your husband.
Do you mean from the point of his death for the next 12 months?
Yes.
That year?
Until the hand on the mirror.
Until the hand on the mirror. Well, actually there were a series of extraordinary events that occurred in my home, which if you'd like to read the book, you'll see. So let me just tell you a few things. The first week after Max died, I took our yellow lab on a walk on the American River Parkway, and it's always, I do it every day, so it's around 7. When I came back, let's say it's around 8, 10 till 8, I looked up at our large Ethan Allen clock on the fireplace wall, mantle, and it had stopped at 12:44, which is the exact time of Max's death, 1 week to the day earlier. I called Tanner out of his bedroom and said, you know, come out. And we looked at it together. I mean, when I first looked at it, I said, I'm just tired. And then I looked again, I said, no, the clock says 12:44. So Tanner and I both saw that. And I basically wrote it off as it must have been a battery that caused this to happen, a battery that died. Although the battery hadn't died ever before. It was kind of strange, for sure. Now, some other things happened. With the day that Max died, in our living room, we had wind chimes, 2 sets outside that some people from the Bee had given me, and they're beautiful chimes, different types. One more like an organ, one more like something you hear at sea, like somewhere near a boat. And the 2 of them picked up, and they were beautiful when Max died. Interestingly, there were 7 of us. We all turned to look to, oh, that's beautiful. And there was absolutely no wind. So that was kind of the first thing. And then there was a light that went out in the bathroom that same day that he died. And just interesting, no lights had gone out before. And then I had the clock after a week. From then on, it was just random lights would flicker in the house, associated usually with things like me rearranging his clothes to give them away, or rethinking his books and could I give those to the library. So there were a number of things that happened over that year.
My question, I accept all that. My question really is aimed at what changed within you, because I accept that happened.
Okay.
But you changed in this year from the death to a year later. So I'm very interested in what happened to you to become more open and different and transformed.
And I guess the answer is those events, because bear with me, it's a paradox. If you're in a fact-based world, you go with facts, right? But what happens when facts are being presented, but they're not in a book somewhere, or they're not something that you've learned? So what would happen is each time one of these things would occur, I would say, I know this is happening. I'm not imagining it. It's a fact that it's happening for me. Okay, anyway. So it was like dripping water in the back of my head that I was not attending to these facts because I dismissed them. And part of it too was that as publisher of the newspaper, if I had done any kind of forensic analysis or any kind of coming out in the open with this, it would have cost me my position. There's no way. I had signed a code of conduct and an ethics code of conduct as publisher of the paper, and it's a requirement at that level. You can't be, so I was not able to do anything with what was happening other than to absorb it, recognize it, and kind of keep files. And I took pictures, and I don't think I consciously knew what I would do in the long run. Eventually I, of course, decided to research it when I retired, and then I wrote the book. But that first year, I would say what changed in me was these occurrences persisted, and I couldn't turn my back on them, and I was deeply in grief. And I think when you are in grief, you're on a different plane. You're far more open. And unless you've been through it, you may not know what I mean. But if you've been through it, it's like it's an opening. You're so vulnerable, and maybe that's why you see things that you can't see when you're not grieving. Does that help?
Yes.
Does that help? Okay. Yes.
I've read the book, and I have 2 questions. I have lots of questions, but 2 main questions. One is your research is impeccable. It's just absolutely amazing. And I wonder if you ran across at any point in Catholic theology the idea of the hand in the afterlife as somebody who is trying to reach out to people in this world for help, that they're stuck in the afterlife, because that actually is a part of Catholic theology. If you dig very deep, you'll find these references. So I wonder if you ever found that. And then secondly, I think one of the experts in the book asked you at some point to try and get more information from for example, Max, when he showed up next to your bed, to try and ask questions to say, is it you, Max, or to get more information. Did that ever happen?
Okay, so the first question, no, I did not know about that in Catholic theology. So that's interesting, and actually I'm going to take a note to research it because I find that intriguing. So it's something in Catholic.
Yeah, my friend actually knows a lot about the deep areas of Catholicism and has read books on this.
Wow.
So I can get in touch with you and give you her name or
Okay.
what the book is or if that.
If you don't mind, I'd appreciate it. I have a website where you can send a communication. It's thehandonthemirror.org.
Sure.
Thank you very
I've
much.
seen it. So.
Yeah, good. Okay, and then the second question, which was about whether or not I had asked Max to help me.
Where you tried to get more information from these experiences.
Yeah, I didn't. I'm 99.9% sure. You know how your memory can trick you sometimes, but I'm 99.9% sure I never actively sought it, because I felt as if I actively sought it, would it be the same? How would I know what it really was? So I think I was kind of what I would call a passive partner, meaning I always looked, I always paid attention, I took the photographs, but I really didn't attend to it actively during those years. And then it was later, it was actually not just my girlfriend, but my husband Jim, who said to me, you know, I can see how much this means to you, and why wouldn't it? It could be the most important thing you do in your life. You know, you need to go after it. So I did, and even when I went after it, I tend to look at the scientists that I was interviewing or the mediums that I was with on sessions. I was trying to be more of a, you know, in a dance where I was the passive partner and they were teaching me or giving to me.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
How has it been since publishing the book and having it, people reading it from your life? I mean, that was one of your concerns you mentioned in writing the book, is what would people think? And I'm wondering, especially about people who aren't so open to these ideas, how that's been for you.
Oh, thank you. That's a nice question. Well, there are the skeptics, and I was on CBS with Charles Osgood on it was May 2nd, I think, or something, on the program with them, and there was a skeptic on that program, and he was the scientist who, well, I guess a ghost hunter is what you would call him, and he just, you know, he didn't buy it, whatever. But so I know those skeptics are out there, and there's actually a great line that Dr. Dean Radin, who I mentioned at the Noetic Institute, said to me, and I hung on to it, which I loved. He said, critical thinking is a double-edged sword. It must be applied to any claim, including the claims of the skeptics. So I think sometimes, you know, it's like a polarized society. You look at our picture today in politics, we're so embedded in our beliefs. You know, it's the Wall Street Journal and it's the Republican, or it's the New York Times, and we're getting further and further and more polarized. I think, too, this kind of polarization that takes place where people say, I don't believe any of this, it's not true, it can't be possible, and they just shut down. And then maybe other people who on the other side are way too gullible about anything and just, you know, don't fully research it or investigate it. So I think critical thinking and skepticism is an important part of life, but I think it can take over and then it's not right. And I personally let me just give you one other quote. Dean Radin said, people often say, I'll believe it when I see it. You'll see it when you believe it, is what he said, which I think is really good. But what happens in life is you have your circle of friends, and so they all love you. And so they all say, the book's great, this, that. I don't know. And my friends in the newspaper industry, for the most part, have been supportive. There was one editor at one paper who said something about, oh, there's all kinds of books like this. It's just another book like that, you know, like the woo-woo book, she calls it. But, and then I know that there are people who will not read this book because they just think it's a series of supernatural events, and they don't understand that it's a love story. It's so much more than that. My hope is that the book will touch people's lives all over the world, and it's actually been translated in up to 20-some countries. So it's in China and Korea and Japan, it's in Asia, it's in Vietnam, Spain, London, Hong Kong, it's in Israel, it's in Brazil. So it's being translated and hopefully read worldwide, and it may take some time to catch on. So hopefully it'll do well.
I'm glad you mentioned other countries, because my question is, do you think this is partly cultural? Because growing up in my family, which was a big Italian family, comments were made all the time that nobody really thought anything of. I mean, I remember my godmother telling me that she was going to my cousin's graduation, and his father had passed away a few years before, and she saw him coming up the walkway, and she said, "You can go back. We're having everything's fine here. The graduation will take place." It wasn't like anybody would think that was strange. My other grandmother used to say she had a premonition every time somebody was either seriously ill or had died. I can't remember what the comment was from the night before. So we kind of took that all in stride, and we shared those things with each other. Like no one was thought that they were strange or crazy. So I'm just wondering if you had done any research on different cultures and how they look at the afterlife and ghosts, or and whether it's just our culture here that's so.
I didn't really investigate other cultures, but if you get out of the Christian culture, if you go into, for example, Buddhism, you look at reincarnation, and that's a whole different philosophy, of course. And they believe your soul goes on into, it goes and graduates. You learn something that you're intended to learn, and then you go to the next level and the next level. I found that very, very interesting. And I went to the library at the University of Virginia, that's the largest library on reincarnation in America, the most extensive, and there's a man named Ian Stevenson who did a lot of the work there. He was funded by the original Xerox CEO, and he found that if you go to places in Asia and India and you talk to children that are under the age of 5, you will often find stories where they will be discussing a life they had before there was no way they could they could know about, and then sure enough it'll end up that their parents will say, "You could not possibly have known, that was your great-grandfather," and so on. And there's a theory that, as you get, one of the women I interviewed, Dr. Robin Van Doren, who studied the brain for her PhD and taught classes on that. She said that we spend our whole lives putting filters in front of ourselves. So from the time you're a baby, you're always having filters of how you're supposed to be and think and do that's programmed. So you lose a lot of that openness, and then all the filters are stacked up like a big long camera lens. She said if you could peel that back and go to where you were when you first were a baby and you were, perfect, then you might be able to see more things and have a different kind of life. But I think we're probably, this is a puritanical culture, America. It's a young culture. We left Europe to gain our religious freedom and our democracy. And there's so much good about that, everything good about that. But it also, I think, would be probably less susceptible to some of this than I think will be in Europe. In fact, I'm going to Spain and I'm going to Madrid and Barcelona and Amsterdam, because the publishers in those countries have invited me to come and speak to groups over there. Mm-hmm. So already that's kind of different. I mean, what I've been doing in America has been a 14-city tour nationwide as a new author, just like any author will have a tour. But that's more like this, which is great, but it's to talk about the book in a setting with a bookstore or a library. Over there, they've got something quite different planned, which is a very large group, and it has to do with national television over there. So I think they are probably looking at it with a little more openness. Yes?
Hi, without giving a spoiler, I was curious about if you have had continuing communications with Max. I do plan to read your book.
Oh, yes, good. I did have communications up until 2012. The last communication I had that I believe was from Max was regarding my mother before she died, and some lights that flickered in our house, and nothing had happened for several years. And then this happened, and I said, I think I'm supposed to go there, because I had just talked to her on the phone, and you'll read about it in the book. But it's a good thing I went when I went, because I would have missed that opportunity had I not paid attention. And I don't know how those lights flickered. It was in a house in Florida. And what's interesting is I don't believe, this is just me, I don't believe in haunted houses per se. Whatever was going on with me, it happened in any house I was in, not necessarily just this one. So there was the one in Sacramento, there was the one in Sun Valley, there was the one in Napa. So whatever was going on was with me somehow, around me, or so. I can't explain it. But so the correspondence or the relationship with the spirit world was with me in Florida just in the year 2012. which was a couple years ago, obviously.
I think we have time for one last question.
Yes.
Have you considered the possibility that some of these events might be originated from you, that your consciousness may perhaps have changed or stopped the clock, that kind of thing?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, Dr. Dean Radin said there will be people who will, suggest that it is possible, because, that's telepathy, or that's the power of the mind. And I think that I wouldn't say that's impossible. It's just that I hadn't thought to do it. It's usually, they've done a lot of studies with monks who do meditation, and there's actually one very famous study that I read about where it's called the split, can't remember the full name of it, but it has to do with intention, where you take a piece of metal and you put slits right next to each other in the piece of metal, and then the light shines through it. If you put major intention on those slits, can you affect how the light filters in terms of energy and matter? And they have proven that you can, that the mind can actually affect matter and energy. So I do think it's possible for sure that mind can. I think the mind's very powerful. So I'm not saying I didn't do that, and it's possible I did. It's just that I would think you'd have to have intention. And I actually had no intention. That's the truth. I mean, I never thought of it. It came to me. And so the way I've chosen to think about it is I met it halfway. Because I always had a choice to make, which in the end would have been to walk away from all of this and let it go. But it kept presenting itself, and you'll see when you read the book, it's much more than the hand. It's many other series of different kinds of events. So ultimately, I think I met it. But I really don't think I engineered it. Is that it? Okay, well, thank you all very much.